Dan Perry here with another Dan on Tech Python video. In the last video we created a loop that went through a bunch of times and it generated random numbers using the randRange function to generate numbers 0 or 1. And then if it was a 1 we said that was a heads, a 0 a tails, and we had variables to store the total, and so we added 1 to each if it was a heads or tails, and then at the end printed it out. This illustrated a while loop and using ifs. What we're going to do this time is we're going to make a couple of modifications to this one. One is we're not going to use if statements for the coin toss. This time, instead of using randRange, we're going to use the randInt, and randInt takes two parameters, a starting and an ending value. Unlike randRange with two parameters giving it a starting and ending, where it goes to 1 less than the ending value, with a randInt, if we say 0 to 1, that will include the numbers 0 and 1, so you don't have to remember to add a value. That way, if say we were throwing a 6-sided dice, we could do 1 to 6 to get numbers including 1 and 6. With a randRange, we would have to do 1 to 7. Is one better than the other? No. It's a matter of which one you prefer to use in a particular case. The other thing we're going to do is, instead of counters for heads and tails, I'm going to create a list called toss1, and I'm going to set it to two elements, two items, and each of those items has a value of 0. So what we're going to do is, whenever a 0 is tossed, we're going to add to element 0, add 1. Whenever a 1 is tossed, we're going to add to element 1. So we're going to get rid of our if-else, and we're going to replace it with appending to a list item. So I'm going to say toss1 and pick the element, and I'm going to pick the element toss plus equals 1. And what should happen is, if we toss a 0, we're going to add 1 to element 0 of the list. If we toss a 1, we're going to add 1 to the element 1 of the list, where 0 still is tails, a 1 is heads. What we'll do is we'll print that particular element. So we're going to print heads when we toss a 1 and print element 1, and we're going to print toss 0 when we toss a 0, or to get the total of the numbers of tails tossed when we tossed 0. I'm going to go ahead and add one more line up in the if to start with, and I want to cut it down to only going through the loop 10 times. I said the if in the while, and I'm going to print toss just so we can see whether we're getting a heads or tails and count it up the first time with 10. So let's run this and see what happens. And I've got a missing parentheses in my print, and yes, I do. One of the disadvantages of trying to type and talk at the same time. So now we've got, okay, here's some 0s and 1s. Let's see if I can count this. The 0s, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the total was 6 tails, 4 heads, so that seemed to work out correctly. So now let's run it with a lot more. So I'll comment out the print, and let's do, say, 100 to start with. and we got 43 and 57. Run it again, 55 and 45, and we can continue and run it a number of times and see what it comes up with. But this allowed us to count or keep track of the number of times 0 or 1 occurred without having to resort to using an if statement. If we were tossing, say, a 6-sided die, we can make an array, or a list rather, that had 7 elements, and we could record 1 through 6 and just realize that element 0 would always be a 0 because we couldn't toss a 0. But this gives us an alternate way of doing the coin toss without having to use an if. And if we think about using a 6-sided die, we would be doing if-elifs for 6 different items. And here it would be no different. The only difference is creating a coin toss, or instead of a toss with 2 elements in the array here, we would create an array, or I keep saying array, a list with 7 elements, and it would work the same way. Thank you for watching this Dan on Tech video. Please subscribe to this playlist so you don't miss future videos. Please check out and subscribe to our other Dan on Tech channel playlists.